Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. What we're going to do for right now is just we're going to sing a couple songs and then we'll get into the lesson, I suppose. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. And you're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for our sake became poor. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God, and you're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Make it a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Make me a sweet, sweet sound in your ear.
Well, welcome everybody. Okay, nobody's here. All right, great. We are glad that you're here as we start another week. Hopefully everybody's doing good, family's still good back at home. How many of you got to go home for Labor Day weekend? A couple of you? Very good, very good. So hopefully your family's good. My mom came in town yesterday, and so that was enjoyable for us. We will have Hub next week at our house. So Monday at 6 o'clock. Actually, I don't know. Are there private mixers and stuff going on? Maybe, possibly. This coming week. We'll probably stick with it. And if you're not able to be there because of other things, that's fine. We will be doing barbecue sandwiches, and we will be outside again. So make preparations for that. I think next week it's getting cooler outside. So I think the high is like 80 and the low 60, so it'll feel great. So just so you know, that'll be coming up Monday at 6 p.m. We are continuing our study on Wednesday nights, thinking about the place to be. The church is the place to be what God wants us to be. And over this next few classes and where we started last week, we're talking about this idea of virtue. What does it mean to be a virtuous Christian? And what all is really involved in that kind of lifestyle? And we talked about that just being a Christian in general, you have to have these virtues, but they're not just arbitrary, they're not just made up, they are an extension of who God is. So when you know God, you can understand them better. I want us to think for a little bit about and where this lesson is going to go. We're going to focus on Jesus and some things that he did in his ministry that I think exemplify what a virtuous person is. But as I was just doing a little bit of research and thinking about it, I want to know what just people find to be a really good person. And I found these traits, and I thought it'd be good to trace them down and see if we can find them in the life of Jesus. But here's some things that stuck out to me. A virtuous person, or someone that's really trying to focus on the right thing, and realize when I'm coming up with these and what I was reading about, it's just random people are saying, this is what a true virtuous person is. Not even coming from a Christian perspective, but I think there's something fuller when we think about it from God's perspective. But one of the first things that came up is someone who always knows what to say. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. They always know what to say in any situation. Maybe a situation or a person that comes to your mind when you think about this. Somebody that always knows what to say. What do you think of? What kind of person do you think of when you hear that?
Mature person.
Okay, someone who's mature. What else?
My mom.
Your mom. Okay, very good.
My mind immediately went to Jesus, and I thought of the times when the Pharisees and the Sadducees tried to trap him.
Okay, don't do my lesson. That's my goal. So we'll get there. Yes, that a situation like that is great, and we will be talking about some of those. But think about someone that it's not that they're just always talking, always sharing information, but they know what to say when it needs to be said. I think there's something significant there. Or maybe about someone that can diffuse a tense situation. I don't know if you have one of those friends. They're very valuable. If you're just like a hothead, or you're just always running your mouth, or you just struggle with just letting your mind and your mouth not really work together, do you have one of those friends that's just able to diffuse a situation really well? If not, find one. I think they're very beneficial. But think about someone that can help in a very difficult and hypersensitive situation. They know what to say at the right moment. Maybe some other situations that come to mind. Somebody that is able to deliver tough news gracefully. Tough news is challenging. I don't know. I think specifically just because it's been on my mind recently, as I was just talking to Mom yesterday, talking about when my grandfather passed away. That was a difficult phone call to get from my mom that is describing that situation. It's like, where do you even start to relay some kind of news like that? And I was just thinking about it specifically because it was really bad timing for us. Like, it was on a Wednesday night. I went up to speak in Birmingham. That's where my family's from. And we were supposed to go see Paw Paw that night. But he had gotten sick, and we didn't know if the stomach virus had been coming around in the house. And Roman was he was on 2 months old at that point. Or he was about 3 months old, somewhere around there, so we were really worried about it. And so we weren't able to go see him, and it was the next day at lunch that I got the phone call that he had passed away. You think, what's the right thing to say in a moment like that? As my mom's trying to get a hold of us and walk through that, how do you say things, how do you say news and say it gracefully? That's just, I don't know, it's been on my mind personally when I think about this. And I'm going to put these out there, and I'll let you kind of give some feedback on them as I talk about them. Confident without being arrogant. Confidence is important. You got to have some self-confidence. You got to know what you want to accomplish and what you want to do, but not to the point where you're priding yourself or you're just coming at it from an arrogant standpoint. The next one is brave but not reckless. Knowing when to act, but not to do it too rashly without really thinking all the way through. And the other one is generous but never extravagant. So I don't know, having those up there and just thinking about some of these attributes of a virtuous person. Now I'll kind of come into it a little bit more. I thought it might be helpful to have them all up there. What are some situations or things that come to your mind when you see descriptions like this? Whether you think a story from the Bible or maybe a situation that's happened. Like I said, I was just thinking about my grandfather yesterday, and as I was thinking about this lesson, it came to my mind, something like that. But what comes to your mind when you see these things?
I start to think about all the people in my life, different people who have different parts of these attributes, and how I look at them and I try and model myself not only after Jesus but around examples around us. Like, okay, this is something that my friend's good at. are good at being confident without being arrogant, let me try and be that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I compare myself with how they do it as well.
So you compare yourself and you want to be better. It's not where you compare yourself, I'll never get to that point. Like it should inspire you to be something better. I like that. What else? Any specific situations maybe recently that just kind of exemplify one of these things? The last one's been on my mind today because if you were here Sunday morning, Gift made an announcement that one of our mission works, they were looking to raise funds for printing Bibles. And they needed, $500, somewhere around in there. And today we got an update that we have now raised $1,500 with more coming in. Something you may not know about this congregation, and let me go ahead and describe this to you. This is a very mission-minded church. We help out with a lot of different mission works all across the world. And it's because of our members here that love to give to things that help spread the gospel. And we always kind of sell them a little short on stuff when we think, okay, we need to raise $500. And then, somebody came up that night actually and they said, I'll just write a check for it right now. It's like, just, like it was nothing. And they're like, okay, wait, hold on. And then it started growing and growing. Think about someone that is truly generous, but it's not for their sake. It's for what they're trying to do, that it's going towards something good. And when I think about someone who's generous but not extravagant, when I think about extravagant, it's just more the focus on the man versus what they're trying to accomplish, especially when it comes to Christianity, that if we think about giving back to God what he has already given to us, generosity is huge, and we need to think through that. These are some things that came to my mind as I was thinking about being virtuous. And the main crux of our lesson is I want to take those and do some study of some passages of how Jesus handled situations. And so for the night, I just want us to think about being virtuous like Jesus, seeing if we can emulate some of the things that he did in his life. Because being virtuous like Jesus means being intentional. So last week we focused on habits. How do we create good habits? How do we spot some bad ones that are in our life that we need to root out? And I think one of the main points of being, of starting a good habit is being intentional. To be a good person, you have to be intentional with everything you do, everything you say, everywhere you go, all of your interactions, just being intentional in the moment. And I think that Jesus was intentional in everything that he did, but it wasn't to the point where we should think, I'll never be able to do that. Because some of the things he did was just simple, like just talking, or maybe not talking and just listening. It's things like that, knowing what to say and not just saying everything, not just fixing it, not just fixing the issue that the person thinks they need to hear, but actually giving them real advice that is important for their life. And so I want to think about intentionality. But it makes me think about some personal questions along with it. If you think, all right, I need to be intentional, what stops us from being intentional? Maybe we just hold back. For whatever reason, we're just not giving our all. Maybe we think about being paralyzed by fear. I don't know if you feel that way. I very easily can get paralyzed by fear. I'm worried about going to say something to somebody. I'm so non-confrontational. Like if there's any confrontation that may rise up, I'm out. Like I don't want to deal with it. I run the opposite direction. If I have to go confront somebody, I was like, I'll send them an email. Like, it's like that way there's no real face-to-face interaction. I just go the other way. Fear is paralyzing. If we're scared to do something, if we're scared to evangelize, we're scared to, just even ask somebody, like, hey, can I pray with you? We get paralyzed. We stop moving. So I think some of the things that come in our way of being intentional is that we could be paralyzed by fear. Or maybe some of our excuses we come up with, we're just waiting for better timing. It's like, I'll say something when the time is right. Like, what time are we waiting for? We need to know, we need to be prepared. Or maybe we say, if I just knew more about the situation, if I just knew more about, what was going on here, then I would be able to speak up. I'd be able to say something. But I think we use that as a cover-up instead of being intentional. Or maybe we're just apathetic. We just think, you know what, I don't really care. Like, I don't care what the situation is. I don't care what's going on. I'm just not going to worry about it. These are things that can stop us from being intentional. And you'll find each one of these negated by Jesus. He didn't allow them to come in his way when he was ministering. So let's go through some of these stories, and we'll talk about them. The first one I want to talk about is the woman at the well. Go to John chapter 4. And we're not going to read this whole chapter. It's an excellent chapter, and we very easily could. But I want us to look at John chapter 4. Somebody start reading in verse 11 and go through 15. John 4, 11 through 15.
The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up in eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water.
All right, so the context of this passage, Jesus is coming along. He sits down at a well. All the disciples go off to go into the town to find some food, and in comes this woman in the heat of the day by herself to draw water. So Jesus initiates this conversation. Now, there's a lot of social things that we have to deal with, and a lot of cultural things just about the Jews and the Gentiles conflicting, and Jesus being a man asking her, a woman, for things like this. So going through all of that scenario. But what Jesus is focusing on is the spiritual side of it. But if you keep on reading from there, you'll find some intentional words that Jesus has with this woman. So recall some of those things and kind of handle this situation. How would you say that Jesus was intentional with his words in this conversation with this woman? What are some things that stick out to you? Some things that you know of how he responded to them where you just think that was really powerful for him to consider it that way? What do you think?
I think using the object of the water, using what their surroundings to communicate to her is really powerful and important in this section. Because he could have just said, I'm the one that's here to cleanse off your sins, whatever. Like, just thrown that out there. But would she really have understood all of that and the importance and the meaning of it? But he connected it to something that they had already had common ground on in the situation. So she was better able to understand it.
For Jesus, he would use these parables all the time. He would just use regular, everyday things that are around him. And he'd talk about a farmer who was planting seed, or he would talk about, fish in the sea, or, these fishermen out there and gathering in all these different fish and separating them. He was really good with parables. I'm really bad with using illustrations in conversations with people. Like if I'm trying to explain something that's really complex and I'm like, all right, hold on, let me illustrate this for you. It's going to take me like 5 minutes to come up with something that may not even make sense, which is probably just the majority of my teaching in a setting like this. So deal with it. But it's like really to know how to illustrate something with the proper words. I mean, that's really good. And Jesus did it all the time, that he would have just an object lesson in front of him. And it wasn't just for something fancy like, preaching a sermon. I think about object lessons. Okay, if I'm going to give a devotional on a Tuesday night, I need to have a good object lesson to get everybody's attention. He was like, no, he just used those in conversation. Like just normal conversation with somebody sitting at a well. He was intentional about getting their attention by using things around them. I mean, that takes skill and that takes observation. To be able to look and see something that's around you and use that and then insert it into a conversation so it'll advance it. I mean, that's being intentional with words and something that I think that we can work on if we are paying attention to things that are around us and the people that we're talking to. Okay, what else sticks out to you about this story with Jesus being intentional with his words?
I think it was interesting. So several times throughout the Bible, you see God enacting his will through water. So you see, like with Noah, he floods the earth. You see when the Israelites are, they cross the Red Sea, the Egyptians drown in the Red Sea. Moses hits the rock and water comes from it. And like throughout the Bible, you see multiple times where water is kind of like a common theme and a common thing. And so in this instance, it's the saving water. It's like the living water that God wants us to be able to, or God wants us to drink and to be in. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Being able to see those connections throughout the Bible and know where they're leading and getting somebody to unfold that for somebody. I mean, you think about somebody that you think is a really good teacher, they're able to take something like that where it has this deeper meaning that comes out. And he was able to do it with something simple. But you find God's plan through water present in something like that. Look at the next part, what he didn't get to. But look at verse 16. Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." Why did Jesus ask that? Why did Jesus tell her to do that? Where's the rest of the conversation go right beyond that?
Talks about our many husbands that she's had.
Imagine if Jesus would have been sitting there. Okay, Jesus knows everything. Okay, he knows the hearts of men, being God. Imagine if the conversation would have started off this way. Hey, I know that you don't have a really good marriage and you've been sleeping around, you've been doing this. Can we talk? Like, how do you think that conversation is going to go at that point? Like, that's not going to go well. Have you ever had to confront somebody that was doing something and you just kind of led that way? It's like, hey, you've been living in sin. I just want to let you know that. Can we talk about it? It's like, that usually doesn't go very well. Like, that's some people, I mean, like, you had to be blunt with them. Those conversations are rare where you can lead in that way. But for the most part, we want people to come to their own realization, hopefully, about what they're doing. And Jesus, that's what he was doing. So he's not just going to lead into that, but that's where he's going. He wants her to see that, hey, what you're doing is not right. So, hey, go call your husband. Now, for her, she's going to have to start, well, I can't. He's like, exactly. She knew. I mean, it was very obvious what kind of lifestyle she had been living in that culture, in that setting. And Jesus just brought that just by asking a question. Now, that's just a powerful question in and of itself, that he knew exactly what to say. Now, I don't know for you, if you're already looking at this and you think, there's no way. Like, how can I be that intentional like Jesus? Like, that seems impossible for me to do. I think through prayer and through studying God's Word, we can come to a better understanding about what to say when we are really filled with the mind of God, when we're filled with the Word of God. It's just an overflow in our life. I really do believe that, where if you are talking with somebody that's going through a difficult situation, there might be a story from the Bible that comes to your mind, and you could even lead with that. Say, hey, have you read this story before? Can we sit down and just study it? There's your lead-in right there. God's already done all the legwork for you. You just have to use that. So what else comes to your mind, though, in this scenario when you think about Jesus being intentional with his words? Anything else throughout here that maybe you glance down and see?
I don't know if it was mentioned or not, but like it does, like just saying he didn't start off the conversation with, "Hey, this is what you did wrong." He slowly got into the conversation. He wasn't just like, "Hey, you're doing this wrong," but he like got some commonality, like what they're surrounded by, and it's like led into what's going on. So it's not like starting a friendly conversation. You don't, I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm probably not. It's fine.
You're good.
But, yeah.
No, you're good. And I think one of the things that comes to my mind along with that is Jesus knew where he wanted the conversation to end. I can't tell you how many conversations I start with people and I have no idea where it's going to end, right? Like, you don't know. It's like, I don't really have a plan for this. We're just going to talk. But Jesus knew, setting out, here's where he wanted to end up, because that's part of that intentional word use. And he starts off slow and is able to get there. If we know what we're going to have a conversation with somebody about, we can pray about it beforehand. I don't know, I just keep coming back to prayer that if we're praying intentionally, God, help me with this situation. I have no clue what to say. I'm going to try. And I'm going to try and speak your words and, speak from your mind, but I'm scared to death. I don't know what to do. If we pray about it first, I think it'll help us to see more clearly where we're going to go in a conversation. So, I don't know, this one it stuck out to me when I think about Jesus using his words and knowing what to say in the moment. And then you get to him having a conversation about deeper religious things where he's kind of putting her religion to the side. He handles her cultural issue. He just steps out and he starts talking to her. He handles her religious problems, where the Samaritans were not worshiping correctly, and he says, here's what true worship is all about. He handles the sin issue, as we talked about, with the adulterous relationships that she's been in. And then he handles theological issues, just where are you with God right now? When you think about the living water and what that produces. And it gets to the end of it, and she goes back in the town and she recounts all this kind of stuff, and she gets the entire city back just because things in her life. Right? I mean, he was revealing things, but he was telling her, he was really opening up her eyes to what was already there. She just had to see it from God's perspective. So this is the first situation that comes to mind, is Jesus being intentional with his words. The next one I'll look at is this story about Jesus paying taxes to Caesar. Go to Matthew chapter 22, and we'll go ahead and read that whole passage if somebody does not mind. Matthew 22, 15 through 22.
Then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their malice and said, Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax. And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And hearing this, they were amazed, and leaving him, they went away.
So I think about diffusing a difficult situation. This is one that really exemplifies that. Look at verse 15 again. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. And they even butter him up and they talk to him. But they're intentionally trying to entangle him in his words. Now, none of us in here have ever tried to do that, where you have crafted this conversation where you're going to catch somebody. Like, you know, going in, I'm going to make them slip up. Like, I want them to really just lay themselves out. Hopefully none of us have ever done that, but we can have bad intentions in a conversation with somebody. We can go in with the wrong motive. And that's what these people are. They're coming in just to catch Jesus, to entangle him. If they can find one thing where he just speaks out of line one time, you know, he's out. Like, we're going to have him caught, and that's it. That is a situation that needs diffusing. There's a lot of them. Every time Jesus comes in contact with religious leaders, like what Chad was talking about earlier, he knows how to handle it. So when I think about can a virtuous person can diffuse a tense situation, what are some tactics, what are some things that come out in this passage that you see about how Jesus diffused the situation?
He asked them questions rather than just telling them the truth.
Okay? He asked them questions. Excellent tactic. Jesus does it over and over again with people. He turns it back on them so they have to answer, and they end up entangling themselves. Okay? Yeah.
I think in some ways he also kind of like pointed out that their focus is not in the right place also, because he uses the reference like paying taxes, that's an earthly thing, but then he also mentions in the last part of it talking about you put this to God also.
He focuses on the earthly to start off with because that's all that they were focused on. And actually, this scenario is going to be one of the things that the Pharisees and the Jews bring back up against Jesus when they're going to put him on trial. Jesus went through two sets of trials. He went through the Jewish trials and the Roman trials. The Jews had to have something against him before they could take him before Pilate. And they had nothing against him. Like they even, if you read that when Jesus is going in Caiaphas' house and they are asking him all these questions, they bring in false witnesses and they don't even agree together. They literally cannot find a single charge against Jesus. But one of the things that they relay to Pilate is that Jesus was trying to go against the Roman Empire. Because that's the only thing they really had. And he was. Said makes sense, and that even the Romans could see this because they understood to some extent religion. Rendered to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and what belongs to God you give to God. Now they struggle with it because Caesar would put himself in the place of a god, but they kind of knew the balance of what was going on here. So he's able to use that to get their attention, and the Jews are actually going to misquote him, and they're going to use this against him later on. But this situation needs diffusing. They're coming in, and they could potentially have arrested him right there had he spoken out of line. There are multiple times in Jesus' ministry where they tried to find some kind of charge to arrest him. And look at the final thing. They had to come by night. They had to have somebody betray him, point out who he was, and then just do all this illegal trial stuff. But over and over again, they try to trap him. And he's able to diffuse the situation. Have you ever Have you ever been in one of those scenarios where you've had a friend or somebody, I mean, they just swing open the door, they come in, and you can read on their face they've got something to pick with you. Like, they've got a bone to pick with you. And you just know it's like, all right, we're about to fight. Like, I don't know, like, they're coming in, I don't know if, their fists are clenched or something, but they're coming right after me. And you have to think in that moment, all right, how do I diffuse this? Like, what, it might be a brother or a sister. It might be a roommate. It might be some just random stranger that came in and they just got upset because they thought that you cut them off in traffic and y'all happen to go to the same store together. It's like, what do you do in a moment like that? It's like, hey, can we stop and pray real quick? Like, how do you diffuse a situation? That's good. I remember this time, freshmen had moved in. We back when we used to socialize with people, we got to do service projects, and we went and door knocked for our. There's a Hispanic. They meet down at Capitol Heights now. There's a Hispanic church. And we were door knocking for them in this neighborhood. And so this is something they wanted to do with all these freshmen that had just moved to Montgomery. And they said, hey, we're going to send you into a Hispanic community. They all speak Spanish. You can just hold up a piece of paper if they don't speak English and just get them to sign it if they want to be a part of the Hispanic ministry. That's what we were doing for a service project. Okay, so we're going in, and I've got this group of students that are with me, and I have this freshman girl. She's about this tall. And I'd been knocking most of the doors, and I convinced her. I said, do you want to do this one? And we're also just asking if they want prayers or anything like that. So she said, all right, I'm going to do it this time. I said, awesome. So, me, 6'3", 250. I step back, and she comes out, and she knocks on the door. This guy comes out, and he says, what do you want? I'm getting my... and so she freezes up, and I just said, hey, we just want to pray with you. He said, really? Well, that's awesome. It's like just change the whole situation just by talking about prayer. That diffused that real quickly, but I was going to be in prayer regardless of what he did. When you think about how do you, what do you do in a crazy situation like that? Jesus was caught in these kind of things over and over again, but it didn't stop him. Like, just because we may have a bad experience over something that happens, what can we learn from that, and how can we be better the next time? Jesus took these charges, and it wasn't really a charge. Look at some of the things they said. Teacher, we know that you're true, and teach the way of God truthfully. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Like, they buttered him up. They knew exactly what to say. And if he would have, forget Rome. We're not under their rule. The Jews are like, ha, got it. Take him to the Romans right now. They were trying to just stir him up, and he didn't allow that to get a hold of him. Don't let other people decide how you're going to handle a situation. You get to decide that. Don't let them sway you. So Jesus diffused difficult situations, but did not compromise truth. He was going to do what he needed to do. He wasn't even going to compromise his morals on it. Thinking like God. Okay? Another one I think about is raising Lazarus. And this comes in with delivering tough news gracefully. We're not going to read the whole chapter, and all this is for you to study a little bit more as I think about these stories and maybe challenge you to see them a little bit different as well. In John chapter 11, Lazarus has gotten really sick, and everybody knows that he's probably going to die from this. But they know, hey, if we could just get Jesus back to the city, he can heal Lazarus. He's been healing people all throughout his ministry. So if he'll just get back to the city with Lazarus, he'll take care of him. And, his sisters, Mary and Martha, everything will be fine. But Jesus doesn't do that. I think this is some of the strangest conversation that Jesus has with people, but it's because he's trying to get somewhere with it. Look at chapter 11, verse 4. When Jesus heard it, he said that this illness does not lead to death. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. So I think, okay, he's not actually going to die. But a little bit further down, in verse 11, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he had meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad that it was not there, that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Now, when I started thinking through times where Jesus delivered news gracefully, you could very easily read the wrong tone into this, right? You could see it's like Jesus wasn't really soft with them. He started off that way. It's like Lazarus has fallen asleep. Okay, that's good. We're going to use soft terms to describe something passing away. They didn't get it. They're like, all right, if he's asleep, he's going to wake up. He's like, no. He died. We've got to go now. things. He's trying to teach them, but he's like, look, don't worry. I said that this illness would not lead to death. And now they might start thinking, well, he's dead now. Are you lying, or is there something else going on? But where did the conversation eventually go? What is the main point with Lazarus? I think you get it in verse 25. And then Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? The topic of resurrection was kind of foreign at this point. Now, there are certain groups that believed in resurrection, and there were some that did not. So the Pharisees believed that there was a resurrection. The Sadducees did not. And Jesus would actually kind of lob that topic out there. Towards the end of his ministry, he uses it just to stir them up. They're talking about resurrection. He just kind of throws it out there, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees start fighting together, and he just kind of backs up from it, and he gets out of the responsibility of what they were trying to ensnare him in. But resurrection was just kind of weird, and so Jesus is going to have to lead into, we've got to talk about resurrection. If they don't really understand what that means, how is he going to jump straight into it? The same thing of what we saw with the woman at the well. He had to be intentional with those words to lead to a meaning. But how do you deliver things gracefully of talking about Lazarus dying? And then he's going to have to confront Mary and Martha, who are upset, and they don't know Lazarus is dead. And Martha's actually very upset, and she's like, Jesus, had you been here, you could have helped him, but you weren't, and he died. It's your fault. But then at other places, he's like, look, it is all about resurrection. Like, he's having to diffuse a situation as part of it, having to bring in some weightier matters. But he was trying to deliver news gracefully. I think there's a ton that we can learn from this story, and I wish that we could see more from it, but for the sake of time, we won't be able to look at it. But Jesus knew how to say what needed to be said when it was necessary to say it. Think about that one more time. Jesus knew how to say what needed to be said when it was necessary to say it. He could have easily jumped right into resurrection, but they didn't even understand it when he talked about it himself. He started talking about resurrection, and they're like, Jesus, you're not going to die. Like, you're going to sit on a throne in Israel, and you're going to rule on David's throne forever and ever. And he's like, no, I'm going to die, and I'm going to be in the grave for 3 days. They didn't understand it. The disciples said, well, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. He's like, you're totally missing the point. He had to teach them correctly about all these things. So the other one I think about is Jesus' trials. Being confident without being arrogant. There's a lot of times where Jesus he really shows full confidence. But one of them is when he's standing in front of Pilate. He remained confident and in control when the situation could have been explosive. There are multiple times where Jesus could have told Pilate, you have no idea what you're talking about. Somebody read John chapter 18, 33 through 36. John 18, 33 through 36.
Therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? Pilate answered, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm.
Then Pilate said, So are you a king? He says, So you say that I'm a king. When Jesus is going through his trials, there's a lot of times where he just didn't speak up. Like, it wasn't beneficial to say anything in the moment. But he chose to say something to Pilate. And very easily, the situation could have just grown exponentially. Because the Romans are in charge. Their thumb is down on the Jews, telling them what they can do, what they can't do, where they can go, who they can be in charge of, who's ruling them, all of this. And so for Jesus to come in and claim to be a king, he says, essentially, Rome's not in charge. When he says, my kingdom is not of this world, he's saying, Rome's not in charge. My kingdom is in charge. Very easily, the situation could have gone from there. It could have really exploded, but he was being confident. And you even find Pilate trying to get him out of this. There's a lot of different ways Jesus could have said things where it would have messed everything up. where Pilate would have really wanted to kill him in the instant, but Pilate tried to wash his hands of it. He didn't want to see Jesus being killed. Tried to find multiple ways to get him out because of the way that Jesus responded. He was fully confident, but it wasn't so confident that it rubbed people the wrong way and it pushed them away. It was speaking truth and what truth really represented. So Jesus remained confident and in control in all these situations. The other one is the healing of the blind man. Full story there in chapter 9. But Jesus didn't let fear paralyze him or hasty decisions impair him. The chapter starts off in telling you what his intentions are. Somebody read verse 1 and 2.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?
And then somebody read 3 through 5.
Jesus answered, it was not this man's sin, that this man sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming, when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
Jesus was trying to help this man. And as the story goes on, once again, the Jews come in, and they don't like what's happening to this man. They don't like that he's healed, and they start asking all these questions. But Jesus comes in, he does what needs to be done. He says, this is for the purpose of God, and then he removes himself from it so that people can come to a realization of who he is. He didn't just act in these situations and didn't think about what the result was. It was always to lead to God, and that's what he says in verse 2. But that the works of God might be displayed in him. That's not just being reckless. That's not allowing fear to take over him. It's doing what needs to be done. And then the last one is feeding the 5,000. When I think about Jesus being generous, that's a great way of illustrating it. Taking 5 loaves and 2 fish and feeding everyone. Something simple that was beneficial. And think about over and over again in his ministry how he was generous and how he helped people. So when I think about a virtuous person, these are the things that come to my mind. I think about Jesus. And you could probably come up with a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different situations, but he exemplifies this, and I think they're great for us to study so that we can try and put them in our lives as well. So appreciate you guys thinking through this topic and thinking through Jesus and his ministry and his life and the impact it has on us. Appreciate you guys being here. That's it.